something years ago, in 2000 and maybe 9. But I will not waste much of our time. I want to introduce to you Dr. Akashambatwa Mbikusita Lewanika. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us.
So, I'm so happy to see you, so happy to be with you, to be engaged.
It's absolutely amazing. And I've held you to ransom, just coming from home.
Yeah.
I'm so glad.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I just want to let our viewers know who you are. Basically, you are one of the founding members of the movement for multi-party democracy. You have written several books, and I just want to go through a list of them. And also, before we go through that list, you are presidential advisor for political affairs, that is in the Monoasa government. In the Rupia Banda government, sorry. And of course, it's also important to mention that you are the brother to Princess Inonge Mbikusita Lewanika, who is another notable person in Zambia. She was a diplomat and is also a politician. Now, let's just look at the books that you've written. There's a book called Milk in the Basket, which was done in 1991. There's The Hour Has Come. I love this one. It reminds me of the movement for multi-party democracy. Yes. Then there's another one, Hour of Reunion. There's Murungushi Experience of 2005. You've also written another book, King Lewanika. And you've told me that you've just finished a book called Culture, Liberty, and what is this?
Landscape.
Landscape.
Discusses the land,
Right.
And labor, and livelihood.
Okay. And
Using our natural resources.
right.
Yes.
Now, the one that I really wanted to focus on is this one, Seekers of Democracy and Development. They're still in the process of writing it, right?
Yes.
And also another one, founding of the this one talks about the founding of ANC and all that.
Yes.
Now, why I got the interest to really have you on set and to talk to us about is the government systems in our country. We just had a president who's just been sworn in, President Hakainde Hichilema. I just want a quick overview of what you have to say about that.
Thank you very much. As you have mentioned, I'm actually in the process of writing a book called Seekers of Democracy and Development. In fact, I should say we are about, because I'm getting a lot of assistance in doing it. And the title itself arises, it's called Seekers of Democracy and Development. One, because the independence movement promised freedom and progress in the language of the 50s. And over time, instead of simply saying we want freedom, we broadened it that we want democracy. Instead of just progress, we specify that we want development.
Right.
So the mission of African independence, not just Zambia, is really democracy and development. But also, there is a professor, when I was at Cornell University, I first started in the business and public administration school.
Okay.
There was a professor who I didn't pay attention to because I found him to be too conservative for a black man in those revolutionary days. But since then, I've been reading his work, and I wish I'd paid attention. One of the works that I've just reading is about knowledge and decision making.
Right.
The point he makes, which is relevant here, is that normally we name people and regard people according to the titles they give themselves. In other words, United National Independence Party. So we presume they're about independence.
Right.
The Communist Party, we presume they are setting economy. So one of the lessons he says that, you see, we shouldn't just be satisfied to look at what people claim to be.
Right.
Or what they claim to want to be, like we want independence, or we want multi-party democracy. We should look at why is it that people can say they want independence and yet they don't achieve it. They want democracy, they don't achieve it. And what it teaches is that it is better for us to examine critically, in fact maybe the word is to interrogate critically. How are they actually organized?
Right.
How do they actually behave? What is their actual character? That will give us a hint of whether or not they are truly leading up to those objectives they are saying they are. So that rather than to say that we are calling the book Democracy and Development, we're saying we are seekers, we may not achieve it.
Right.
The example he gives is that we have a lot of businesses which call themselves profit-making businesses, but many of them don't make profit. So we have to ask, why are these profit-making businesses not making profit?
Right.
And the answer is found in how they are organized, how they actually operate.
Okay.
So that when we have failed to institute democracy, we can find out why by looking exactly at how we are organized.
Right.
This is where now our system of government itself, regardless of what it's called, whether it's called one-party participatory democracy or called multi-party democracy, those are just claims.
Technologies.
But how is it really organized?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Now we get to that point. How do you think? I know we are now in the multi-party democracy, and you are part of the movement for multi-party democracy. Where are we at currently? Let's bring it.
Yeah, let's say that you see the independence dispensation established a multi-party democracy.
Right.
So in 1991, we were merely demanding to reintroduce it because for 17 years, that had been destroyed, it had been aborted. So that the promise we made in 1991 was that we will go back to re-establish a multi-party democracy. Now, this requires particular governance systems and particular behavior.
Right.
Now, what we have done is that, apart from changing names, our system of government is still a one-party system of government. Our behavior is a one-party state behavior in the sense that all power is in the presidency, the person of the presidency. The ruling party thinks it owns the government. In fact, under a one-party state, they were naked enough to tell us that it's the party and its government.
I remember that.
Not that the government belongs to all the people, but that the party is supreme on the government.
Right.
So we have not really in practice, in terms of systems of governance, behavior of leaders, the relationships we established between the institutions, they've not shifted from a multi-party, a one-party state mentality. That is our problems. So, but we mislead ourselves by focusing on what people claim rather than allowing ourselves to interrogate how they are actually organized, how they actually behave, how they relate to each other.
Okay. Now let's get to the reality. How can we effectively organize ourselves not to be just as speakers of the word, but actualizing the issues of governance systems to ensure that these other promises that are made are actually actualized? And also you brought out another cardinal issue of too much power vested in the president.
Yes, and unfortunately, although it is very obvious under the one-party state, as I said, it was very naked, that the party has said we are the only party, and that we own government, and that the party is supreme. They told us that. But unfortunately, even when I say that at independence we inherited a multi-party system, if you examine closely the constitutional arrangements then, they still facilitated one-party domination of government. They still put power in one person. The one-party state merely accentuated that aspect.
Right.
And now, the constitutional arrangement at independence combined the Westminster model, a parliamentary system of Britain, with the presidentialist model of the Americans. So that our president had a combination of powers. The powers that the American president has, the powers that the Queen of England has, the powers that the Prime Minister of England has, and even powers they don't have in terms of being commander-in-chief and so. So it was a conglomeration of power in one office, and an office which was itself personalized. So this is our challenge, how to decompose that.
How do we do that?
One of the decomposition which is quite lends itself to obvious is that we must separate the functions of a head of state from the function of a head of government.
Right.
The head of state should be really the custodian of the constitution, in charge of the constitutional institutions. So that whereas the head of government should really be your politician. In other words, the head of state should be above politics, should be above partisan politics, and he should represent everybody and represent the whole system of government.
Right.
Then the prime minister will be your politician, the one who can, compete with other politicians, pursue his party. But the other aspect of it is to divorce the ruling party from government.
Right.
The government belongs to all the people. It does not change. We talk about the UNIP government, the MMD government, the PF government.
Which shouldn't be the case.
There's nothing like that. There should only be a Zambian government all the time.
Thank you.
The ruling party simply has the privilege to lead in the political guidance of the administration for public service.
Right.
And so that is one aspect. Then also in the separation of powers.
Right.
We have a situation where our parliament, which should hold the executive accountable, is in fact terrorized by the executive. Is terrorized by the executive. Of the set, you are talking about people waiting for the president to name his cabinet.
Right.
Some of those who are anxiously waiting are members of parliament.
Right.
Which means that they are expecting something from the executive. If they expect something from the executive, they cannot hold that executive accountable. Because that executive can send them sweets, can make you a minister, can make you whatever it is. So that we need to examine the relationship between the executive and parliament.
Right.
In fact, there is a very grave illustration of what the problem is. You see, we have a situation where the constitution of the country, which I say the president, the head of state, should be the custodian of that.
Right.
Instead, parliament makes the constitution. The proper thing is that the constitution should make parliament.
Right.
Parliament should arise out of the constitution.
Right.
The constitution should not arise from parliament. So those are some of the fundamental relationships, issues, system readjustment areas which we need to consider in order to truly have a government which belongs to all the people, and which all the people are convinced belongs to them because it serves all of them, regardless of their party affiliation and their areas. And we need to have institutions that can check each other, which means they have to have some autonomy. They can't depend on, if the judicial officers, the judges, are waiting for the president to give them the fruits of office, they cannot really play their autonomous role that is expected of them.
Now, you brought out a very interesting aspect. There was a time when we had the issue of the NCC in terms of the constitution making processes.
Yes.
And I remember, I think one of the issues that was brought out was that submissions was that Parliament ministers should be selected from outside Parliament, where MPs should not be a part of cabinet, but should be selected from outside.
Yes,
is that basically the ideal issue that we?
That is what the American system is. As I said, we've married two systems.
Right.
Now, in the American system, the cabinet officers are not in the legislature, right, although the vice president is a member of Congress in a way that if there is a vote and they are equal, he can cast that vote, but normally is not a participating member of that, and certainly none of the other cabinet officers are. But what it means is that the presidential system in America is very checked by its legislature,
right,
and the judiciary also is quite independent. Now, in our system, we take all the powers of the president and take away the checking mechanism of the parliament from that presidency and the conglomeration. Talking about the constitution making process we have adopted, our original constitution was negotiated, and it was negotiated by the identified stakeholders then, who had a very critical interest in it. One, after our January 1964 elections, UNIP became a majority party, so it has an interest of the majority party. Congress became a minority party, it had an interest of minority party. The Europeans, who had decided that they would stay on as Zambians even after independence, they also had some concerns. There was a question of whether Barosland would go into independence together with Northern Rhodesia to create Zambia or not. So those were the key issues that needed to be settled.
Right. And
a package was negotiated. That package which was negotiated was a give and take, which gave assurance to Barosland that you can be part of Zambia under these terms. It gave assurance to the European community that the new Zambia will not be racist, there will be no reverse racism, and there will be no property grabbing from the white people who have property. It also gave assurances to the minority party, the Congress, that we will be a multi-party democracy, and that we will recognize the opposition. The leader of the opposition, in fact, after independence, had a government house. He had ministerial status in terms of housing, accommodation, transport, and even office in parliament. And but now this deal, which was a give and take, needed assurance that it would be respected. The assurance was in a referendum clause. That referendum clause said, now that we've agreed on this package, give and take, none of us should change it. If you want to change it, you have to go to a national referendum of all the people, so that whatever you are proposing had to be approved by more than 50% of eligible voters, not just registered voters, not just voting voters, but eligible voters. Which means that any proposal to change the constitution, it was up to the people as a whole to change. But in 1969, we held a very fraudulent referendum to end all referendum. When the Zambians voted for that, they removed power from the Zambian people and deposited them in parliament to be able to change the constitution. All the constitutional mess that we are in now arises from that decision of shifting the powers over the constitution from the people to parliament, and to a parliament which always operates on a partisan basis. So that when you talk about the, was it NCC? What
right,
was,
the
National Constitution
making
whatever
process,
it was.
yes.
Now, people were going there in packages. Some went there with, even before they start the meeting, they've already been told by whoever sent them that you go there and say, put a clause, Zambia will be a Christian nation, so that any other proposal, you are deaf to it. Others went there, you go there, say we want 50+1. Others, you go there, say no to 50+1. So it was not a free debate. Right. It was not a debate by people who go there open-mindedly exchanging issues. Right. So that the outcome of such an arrangement cannot be a good constitution and does not represent all the people.
Right.
What that process succeeded is that the few people managed to be members of that got a lot of money, bought houses, bought cars. That's it. But the product was a more messy constitution than they had in the first place.
Okay. Now, I want to cut you short there. So, it was messy. How do we?
It is still messy.
Right. So, what processes can be done to alleviate us from that mess?
We are challenged to go back to have the courage to go back to the drawing board.
Okay.
We are challenged not to assume that everything is all right because you have a new president or you have a new ruling party. We have had, is it 6? This is the seventh president?
That's right.
So if changing president can solve Zambia's problem, there have been 7 times of trying to do that.
Right.
How do you make sure that the 7th time does what the other 6 times failed? We've changed ruling parties. How do you make sure that the next change of ruling party does what the other changes of ruling parties have? This brings back what we started with, that we have to look at the system,
right,
rather than the person of the president, the name of the ruling party, who is a minister, who is not a minister. We have to look at the system.
Right.
If what has happened in the past 6 times, including the 7th time, is that we have changed personalities, we've changed parties, but we have not changed the system.
Right.
Now, if you do not transform the system, even if you change personalities, if those people are not transformed themselves, and if they are not operating in a transformed system, you have achieved nothing.
Right.
So as of now, there has been no institutional system transformation.
How can we do that? What would you advise? I know
what I would advise is to recognize that. In other words, you can't take over government, assume that the system is okay.
Right.
The only thing which was wrong with the system was Lungu or Kaunda or Chiruba.
Right.
But now that it is me, the same system which Kaunda ran, which Lungu ran, is all right in my hands. Or that if we have a good guy there, then the system is okay as long as you have our relative or our party member or someone we love or somebody we trust.
Okay.
That, again, is a mental slave. The other aspect is to challenge our political leaders not to treat the people like kids. There is a fundamental constitutional, institutional fault line in Zambia. There's something fundamentally wrong with Zambia. It cannot be mended by building roads, by lowering the price of meal, or anything of those things, which are of course very good.
Of course, yes.
But without changing, addressing the root problems, without really redressing the root problem, in other words, going back to the drawing boards, of arranging, what the Constitution is basically a power sharing arrangement. So we have to rearrange the power sharing.
How can we do that?
We rearrange the power sharing between, as I said, the heads of state function, the head of government function, between the executive and the legislature. Make sure that the judiciary is truly, truly independent. And also we have to rearrange the power arrangements on levels of government. The central government, the local government. We have to rearrange the power sharing between the traditional authorities and the modern government. And at the end of the day, no personality, no institution should have all the power to dictate and govern unchecked by the other levels of government, the other branches of government, the other types of government. That is where the challenge is. But if the people of Zambia are satisfied that as long as this fought this time round, last time it was very bad because when this guy was president, I didn't have a job. Now that this guy is president, I have a job, then everything is all right. Then we are not going to solve that problem.
Right.
Then we are going to go into a 7th round of running and remaining in the same place.
Right. Over the years, Dr. Lewanika, you've seen all these systems and you've talked about it.
I've seen them with a lot of frustration and pain.
Right.
Because I've seen a lot of high hopes crushed. I've seen a lot of effort wasted. And I've seen 60 years of independence, which leads to no independence. We are not independent. We are so dependent. We are more dependent now than we were on October 24th. Mentally, as well as economically and politically.
And having said that, how can we make it work? I know you've talked about the systems of governance, but also does it also have to do with the way we engage the Zambian citizens?
And our honesty.
The levels.
In other words, I may tell you that I want to go to parliament to build roads, blah, blah, blah. When privately I know the last MP went there had cars and if you get loans and you might even become a minister. In other words, we have private agendas which we don't reveal. But once you are there, those private agendas are the ones that drive. This is why I was saying that someone gets independence saying, I'm a United National Independence Party president. So we assume he's bringing us independence. We don't check whether the way he's organized, the way he leads, actually gives us independence.
Okay.
We go into government and say we are bringing multi-party. Then we start dancing on the eve of the election results. And then we don't check to say that has the system changed? So that, we have to have a mind check. And the mind change has to come with a real serious critical review of where we are. The other mindset is not to worry about ourselves. Any system, however bad it is, feeds some people.
We've seen that.
If we now are satisfied that as long as we are part of the feeding, the people being fed,
that's fine,
then it's all right. Any system has its victims. if we don't care about that, unless we are the victim, then that is another problem. So that we have to care about each other. We have to care about everybody. Whatever we want for ourselves, we have to care that does everybody else have it. We have to not be satisfied that I myself am comfortable under this system, therefore it's all right. Or under this system, my religion is respected. Then I don't care if other people's religion is not respected. I myself, my area is being catered for. Then I don't care if the other people are not being catered. In fact, if the other people are not being catered for, cry, I join the ranks of trying to shut them up.
Very sad.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you were a political advisor to the president at one point. And I hear you're talking about all these issues of systems. When you were in that position, you had the privilege to air some of these issues out and probably to play a role and say, look, let's change this. I want to get your thinking.
This is what I'm saying. My experience
what has been your experience?
Is full of frustration.
Right.
First of all, let me go. I know casually we say that I was advisor to the president. That is not correct. The proper position is that you are a special assistant to the president.
Special assistant to the
I
president.
think those who have worked in the executive offices know that we no longer have typist and secretary. We call them special assistant to the chief executive.
Okay.
Now, it's like the question you're asking me, you go to the special assistant to the chief executive, say, you used to run, this company. What were you doing? Of course, that role gives you an opportunity.
Special, of course, it does. And
that's why
I
it is not an executive position. In other words, I can't say I want this and it happens. So that
advising.
Well, in fact, assisting and advising are two
different things.
Assisting is that the president has many functions.
Right.
He only has two hands. Right. So the assistants are these multiple hands to do what he wants those hands to do. Okay. Of course, those hands may tell, no, you put me in hot water, that sort of stuff. But it is not an executive position. Okay. In fact, it was my first and only non-executive position I've ever held. So I have an experience of being in a high position, which is non-executive, and face those frustrations. Okay. So that I didn't want to answer it in a way that says I didn't have an opportunity to advise, but I just wanted to clarify.
Okay, that's great.
So that it's not only that. I was also a minister. I was also a member of parliament.
Right.
So I took on these positions with a lot of hope, with a lot of effort. In the case of MMD, really, I could say that the concept of MMD, the implement, was me. There is nobody who was in MMD who was not there because I recruited them or they were recruited by someone I recruited to start with.
Right.
Okay? But it was created not for me, unlike the new parties. I didn't go to say we need to form MMD so that Aka will be president. Maybe that was my stupidity, my naivety, what people would condemn as being theoretical. Right. But that was not the purpose. Right. The purpose was create an organization for the people to do with it what they will to do, on the assumption that under the one-party state, the people of Zambia were restrained. They were denied their right to form political parties of their choice. So we thought that if we reinstate their rights to form their political party, in other words, the purpose of MMD was not to form MMD as a party, was to liberate Zambians to have the freedom to form parties of their choice. Now, what they do with those parties is their responsibility. Right. Just like the elder generation, which founded the Northern East African Congress under my father. Right. They fought for the vote. They said that the problem with colonialism was that the Africans had no voice in governance, that voice was supposed to be expressed through the vote. Now, once we got that vote, it is up to each voter to use it properly.
Mm-hmm.
If you use it on the basis of who intimidates you, who frightens you, who buys you, if you sell your voter's card, then you can't blame those who fought for your right to vote. You have to also look in the mirror. What part of the problem are you functioning in? So our heritage, we were given the right to vote. Under the one-party state, that right to vote was very restricted. In other words, you could vote either for a handsome middle-aged man, keke, or a frog. Carol, you were not there.
No, she wasn't.
So that vote became meaningless.
Right.
You could only vote for someone who belongs to one party.
Right, unit.
And even among those you are voting for, you can only vote from those who the party leadership had decided that you should vote from. The party it's called sieving, vetting. They vetted who stands. So that when we fought to return the multi-party system, it came with the right to a demand for that vote to be meaningful.
Right.
To be a vote you can cast with free choice. What we have done with that vote, returned back to us, is our responsibility. And we haven't done very well. I was listening to the inauguration speeches.
Yes.
The last over President Hakainde's thing. And there are two things I didn't like. One was the misinformation of who do you thank for this freedom to be able to change government. All the praises was to President Kaunda. That is not historically correct. If we did not fight against one-party state, that freedom wouldn't be there. But we are not given credit. Not that if you give us credit, everything will be solved. But if you don't give us credit, it means you don't understand your history. And if you don't understand your history, you can't understand your present. You can't decide on your future based on lies, based on a false foundation. The other thing I didn't like was the role played by the British, the Commonwealth, even President Obasanjo was basically there as an instrument of the external affairs, despite being a former president. I was not happy that we were not totally in charge. I was not happy that outsiders were actually telling us that they were part of this change. We worked together. No, we don't need outsiders to work together over our changing of government.
Right.
That should be our total responsibility. They should be there clapping in the audience, not us in the audience clapping for them. So I wasn't happy about those two aspects of that.
But the rest of the, what about the rest of the other things that you're happy about?
Well, I was happy that President Hakainde won. Right. It gives us a fresh start.
Right.
I was happy that the other African presidents came. I wasn't happy that not all of them were given a chance. Instead of those representing external forces, Obasanjo, the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, and the minister from Britain, they should have allowed the other African heads of state to speak. Right. I would have been much happier with that.
They were
but their presence
right.
was also very, very, right. very, very good. I was also quite happy with the presence of opposition party leaders from the region, because one of the faults that we have had right. is that the African Union, the SADC, the COMESAs have become clubs of heads of state. So that once you are a ruling party, you become a partner with other ruling parties against all opposition parties. And this kind of, so that I hope that what happened there is an opener that the ruling parties in our region in Africa, the heads of state in our region, must not turn our institutions into clubs for heads of state, or into forums for ruling party, exclusive forum for ruling parties. That there's need to introduce a people element in all our regional institutions.
Right. How can that also be actualized here at home? How do we create what you've just said, a people inclusive system of governance and administration? How can we do that?
Yes, it is also necessary at what we are talking about at continental level.
Right.
Is very, very necessary at national level, and is part of the fundamental fault lines. Our constitutional arrangements, our economic system is top down.
Right.
It is not rising out of the roots. In fact, the Zambian government is less of a people government than the colonial government.
Why do you say?
Because under the colonial government, the district commissioner had day-to-day relationship with the village headman.
Okay.
After independence, the Zambian government just starts from State House to the district commissioner, district administrator, whatever we call them, office. Below the district commissioner's administration, there is no Zambian government. There is no day-to-day relationship. There is no linkage between our people in their homesteads, rural homesteads, village headmen, and the government. The village headman is a public, political, and administrative leader. He should be an integral part of government.
Right.
Not just someone you go and kneel before when you want a vote. On a day-to-day, in other words, there must be a link from the village level all the way down, which is basically how our traditional system is organized. Our traditional system, whether it's Lubemba, whether it's Barosland, it is structured in such a way that from the king to the village headman is one system, and they are tied up. Now, this foreign governance we have adopted after independence is floating at district level, and it is not linked to the people. That is a challenge. And it is also reflected in the alienation of the people from the economy. The economy we keep talking about, the economy we are focusing on, the economy we are talking about, inflation about, is an economy in which the majority of our people have no role. We announce that we have a free market. This is a mockery to the majority of our people, because a free market is only real to two types of people. Those who are free to sell something in it and have the power to buy something in it. That's all. If you have no buying capacity, you are not a participant in the free market. It is not free for you. In fact, there's no free market. There is a market which is available for those with buying power. There is a market which is available with those with something to sell in that market. The economic system we have adopted, or by default allowed to function over us, is also delinked from the majority of the people. The majority of people cannot be employed. The majority of the people can only participate in an economy where they are. In other words, we have to refocus on our land and natural resources where our people are. We have to have an economy in which what our people do with their land and natural resources, how they engage there, is an integral part of the whole economy, which is not the case at the moment. Because we are telling our people that for you to have development, you have to sell your land. In fact, the selling of land is criminal. There is no development that's going to come to a peasant African in exchange for his land. There is nothing that can be built or operated on your land which is more valuable than your land over which it is built or operated. So there should be nothing, no factory, no mine on African land where Africans are not shareholders. And their contribution of land is always more valuable than whatever other contribution of machinery, building that come onto it. So we have to re-examine that.
Right.
I don't believe that there should be a major industry in which Africans, at the very least, at the beginning, should have at least 50% shareholding in it.
Okay. I'm glad now we're talking about the land. And, you know, over the years, over the past few years, we've seen a lot of land being sold to the Chinese.
Not only the Chinese,
and
it could be Indians,
yeah.
it could even be some of us, because you see, we also buy land from communities and personalize
and resell it.
And then we are free to resell it. Meanwhile, the owners, those who have held custody over this land for centuries, are given in exchange money. There are some areas of Barosland where you find that some traditional leaders at their homesteads have some car with, tires are flat, blah, blah, because somebody gave them a car in exchange of land, didn't tell them they need petrol, they need what and what, so they can't even maintain it. So the person they gave land is developed. There was a case, I went to Solwezi once, and the day I arrived there was a big headline praising one of our traditional leaders for giving land to the Solwezi District Council. When I met our leader there, our traditional leader, I said, no, I'm not happy about that. Because, do you mean that development can only come to your chiefdom in exchange for land? So I asked him what they wanted, the city council, the Solwezi council wanted the land for. It was obviously for some buildings. So I said, now, did those buildings, whether they were hospitals or schools, tell you that if I'm built on traditional land, I'll collapse? After you've given that land, those who are now building on the land which was under your custody will be paying rates not to you, but in perpetuity to somebody else, to another institution. Meanwhile, what you have been given in exchange for that land is consumable. Your grandchildren will not find it. That is really irresponsible. And it's not just in Solwezi, it's all over the country. As I say, our land management system borders on criminality, because we are stealing from future generations without their consent. We are stealing from the majority of our people without their consent. We are taking public property which belongs to all our people and privatizing it for individual profit. That is criminal.
How can, I know it's been a process over the years, but surely there should be some light at the end of the tunnel, especially does this have anything to do with the land policies? What can we do to ensure that we do not lose this land for future generations? Does it border on the policies? What is it?
Well, the policies support a certain attitude, a false attitude of where development comes from.
Right.
Okay? Development does not come from money. Money comes from development. Development comes from land and natural resources. Even when people are fighting for independence, for African freedom, the fight was over land, command over land and natural resources. That's what independence meant. And your right to govern yourself in such a way that you keep control over your land and natural resources. That is the fundamental mission of the African freedom movement, of the liberation movement, And that is the real purpose of independence. If we falter at that level, we have a development model that increasingly takes away land from our people, disempowers our people over land. Then we are betraying the promise of independence. We are betraying the promise of the African freedom movement. And then having a vote is meaningless if you are voting for people who are going to sell your land. And I should also say that at the time of independence, 96.4% of Zambian land was protected under the custody of our traditional authorities.
Right.
Those who are selling our lands are those we thought were our liberators. I don't know what percentage. I know at independence, the alienated land alienated from indigenous African hands, was less than 5%.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what percentage of land is now alienated. It may be 50%. And the way we are going is not towards returning more land to our people, but towards taking away more land from our people.
Is it too late to redeem that?
No, of course I'm a revolutionary. I cannot believe that the revolution will fail. What I don't know is how long it will take.
It shouldn't.
And what I do know
Right.
is that it takes a mental transformation.
Right.
Bob Marley says we have to liberate our minds. That's where the problem actually lies. What is colonized is our minds. You are thinking in the third person about yourself.
Right.
In other words, you are more worried about the needs and interests of those people to whom you are selling land, rather than your own interest, the interest of your future generations. So one of the areas of the struggle is the mental transformation, the behavior transformation, even ahead of the institutional and system transformation.
Okay. You are. I'm going to bring you to the reality where you are now, because probably people are wondering, where is Dr. Lewanika? And thank you so much for that insight of the governance systems, the policies, the land. But in case somebody wants to know, where are you now, and what are you doing?
I am mostly.
In case I want to find you.
I'm mostly resident in Mungu. I am operating from what we call the Barosi National Library Documentary and Development Services Center. And one of the resources it definitely has are books and documents about our history and our present situation. And I'm very conscious that I'm in the evening of my days. So I'm busying myself trying to document our history, trying to document our issues, as we started to say that right now I'm engaged in writing a book on democracy and development. This reviews the history of from the welfare society started by Mr. Donald Swale, David Kaunda in 1924, all the way up to the present.
Right.
That what has been our mission? What was the fundamental issues? What have we lost? Some of the things we lost was that the earlier pioneers of the independence movement, the African liberation movement, had one, they believed in collective leadership, not personalized leadership. In fact, one of the slogans of the African National Congress is team spirit.
Right.
We have lost that. We need to recapture that. The other aspect is that leadership started on as volunteers. They were not professional politicians. It is only in the late 1950s that a crop of people became professional politicians.
Is there anything like professional? What is to be a professional politician anyway?
Is for you to depend on the salary you get on account of being a politician. It's almost a parasitical parasite sort of livelihood. Okay. Although that's not very fair, because they do work. They serve a positive function.
Right.
But basically, there's nothing wrong with that, but it shouldn't come with losing that spirit of public service.
Right.
In other words, if becoming a political leader becomes a job to you, to feed you, rather than an assignment for you to serve the people, that is where the tricky decision has to be made. And that's where your genuine motivation are actually what matters, not what you talk about, not what you claim to be, but what is your real motivation. When you say you want to be a councillor, you want to be an MP, you want to be president. Yes, we know all the words that are said, why people want to do that. And we also understand that most of that is fake. But each one of us, each one of them, does know his real motivation.
Right.
And that real motivation is what actually drives what they actually do, and the results of what they do, whether or not they meet the objectives of democracy or the objective of national development, depends on their genuine motivation. It depends on their actual behavior. It depends on the institutions that they run. How fit are they for institutions that are there to serve the people? If your motivation is wrong, even if you are put in an institution that is there to serve the people, it will not result in service to the people, because it will be in conflict with your genuine motivation, which is self-service rather than public service.
Right. Finally, as we come to a close, Dr. Lewanika, what has been your motivation? And for me, I think that will also act as a guide for the current crop of leaders that we have.
I think my motivation and what has made me,
right,
I think, is my family background. My father was the founder President General of the first political party in Zambia, the African National Congress.
Right.
He was also among the pioneers of the trade union movement.
Wow.
So that apart from his professional life, he was a public servant on a voluntary basis in many, many areas. He ended up being a king, but that was at the end of his life.
Okay.
Before that, he was a miner, and he was a welfare officer, and also playing his role in the political development of the nation. And so we were brought up really that whether it's our education or whatever, it is there for public service.
Right.
So in a sense, sometimes I feel like I'm bewitched, I'm cursed, because when I was a general manager at Indico, the chief executive of Indico companies, I found myself at odds with my colleagues. They were interested in Mercedes, they were interested in housing, materialism.
Right.
So fortunately, my upbringing has created someone who is really, I'm not materialist at all. In fact, I'm very bad at working for myself. If you give me a company which is Aka's company, for the sake of making profit for company, I'll find myself demotivated. But if you give me an assignment which is a public service,
right,
that's really what fires me up.
Okay. How, finally, Dr. Lewanika, what is your word to the young people of Zambia that are watching you?
Number one,
to motivate them?
Number one is really to examine yourself, that what is your purpose in life.
Okay.
Number two is to examine your society, the African society. What is it? what are Africans all about? Why did we fight for independence?
Right. History.
What is your role in that? Because that fight for independence, that fight against slavery, colonialism, independence, is really not over. What would be your role in that? The other advice is to read. Because there is a lot of misinformation out there.
Right.
You have to validate it by reading. That's very important. Secondly, be clear. We all, even the young people, we all know, if you look at who is president, who was president, you have some idea what is wrong with them or what is right with them. So you are challenged to be the person you want your leaders to be. If you are against corruption, your first challenge that you yourself, under all circumstances, at a personal level, you yourself should be not corrupt.
Right.
If you think your leaders should be more enlightened, you are challenged to enlighten yourself. Right. So be the leader you want the leaders to be.
Okay.
And also be clear that the means is related to the end. In other words, just because you want to be president, if the means you use to be president are corrupt, your presidency will not be corruption free.
Okay.
Huh? So that you see, if you are funded by thieves with ill motivation to be an MP, to be a president, whether you like it or not, it will affect not what you say about your presidency, not what you say about your parliamentary seats, but what you actually do there will be affected by the means to which you use to get there. The proper means to leadership is not a straight line. You are not going to win the first election you stand in. Just because you lost and somebody told you lost because you didn't have money, don't try next time to get corrupt money to save that.
All right. Okay. Dr. Lewanika, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I hope we can. I'll follow you to Mongo to come and
yes, in fact, that's where this next session should go.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and goodwill to all the people who have listened in and watched us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And that's all we had for you on this edition of the program today. Thanks for joining us. Goodbye and God bless.